Hello, and welcome to the Godless Bitches podcast. I'm your host, Beth Presswood, here with Lynnea Glasser.
Hello.
Tracie Harris.
Hello.
And Jen Peeples.
Hi, everybody.
We are a podcast by the Atheist Community of Austin that has an organization dedicated to positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can contact Godless Bitches at bitches@atheist-community.org. I kind of messed up the intro there. So, how is everybody today?
Doing well.
Yeah, doing good.
Yeah, great. I'm back from the frigid north, so that's better.
I wish it was colder here.
Oh, it probably will be.
Good.
We get it in February, so.
Good.
Yeah.
70 in January is just
No.
wrong.
Yeah, if we're going to get a freeze, you'll get it in February.
All
Still
right.
plenty cold for me.
You're a California girl.
Yeah, so this is fine.
All right. Well, news was a little bit light this week. We already talked about Jessica Alquist last week and how she won her case. She's also been getting lots and lots of threats and abuse over it, which you can read about at Friendly Atheist and Feringula and other places. Yeah, definitely condemn that. So, but Lynnea has something about abuse as well this week, so take it away.
Definitely. Well, I have been doing some volunteer work for domestic abuse resources, and what I've learned from that is that sometimes religion gets used as an excuse to perpetuate this abuse. I feel like it just popped on. I don't know if I've been talking this time.
I've been hearing you. We'll just
Slightly.
go with it.
We're in the same physical room. Okay, so
Oh.
Yeah.
howdy.
Yeah, your volume was low on my end.
okay, it's this microphone. I don't know. I'm not touching it, but it's okay. We're fiddling with it.
Yes, technical issues.
Trying to talk. I'm looking.
We
over
don't
at the
edit
line
shit.
over there too. So trying to see.
I can hear it coughing.
Yeah, it keeps swapping in and out. That must be really awesome to listen
You
to.
know what? Here.
All right, I'm taking Tracie's mic.
We might have to share right now.
That's okay. We're good at sharing. I'm gonna turn this mic off then, so that there's no feedback. Okay, so I've been volunteering for domestic abuse help resources, and I've been kind of hearing how religion is being used to perpetuate this abuse. And I don't want to get into too much specifics because, it's anonymous and I want to respect that. But one of the major resources that they recommend, just for reading, for edification, is Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. And it is specifically about men who use their abuse. That's not to say that women can't be abusive. It's just that this is specifically about the men who do the abuse. And part of the reason that, religion is used for this is because religion supports it, as we've talked about a lot. So I wanted to read some clips from the book and also kind of tie it into the things that I've been experiencing with helping people. In Genesis, for example, this is from the book, this includes the following passage. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. There's not a very good way to spin that to not say that your husband is the one who controls you.
Other translations say pain, not just sorrow in childbearing.
Yeah, so you're gonna be feeling pain, and you're gonna deserve it. And this person who wrote this book works with people who are abusers and who get abused. So a lot of the clients that she worked with would use those kind of passages to justify the abuse of their partners. There's a study that she cited also that said that 21% of conservative Protestant clergy said that no amount of abuse would justify a woman leaving her husband. And 26% agreed with the statement A wife should submit to her husband and trust that God would honor her action by either stopping the abuse or giving her the strength to endure it. And that's actually a true statement. You know, if God was real, you should be able to pray to him and he should stop the abuse. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. And these preachers who, you know, sometimes maybe a woman would turn to in her moment of weakness, you know, what do I do? How do I take care of this? And he just says, pray that God will stop the abuse, or pray that you can just take it.
I mean, it's not funny. I feel bad because I'm laughing, but I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just unbelievable. Like, I can't believe that somebody would actually say that, to the point that I almost have to laugh because it's so unbelievable. It's not that it's funny. It's absolutely not funny, but you can almost not say it without laughing because it's like a ridiculous thing.
Yeah, and I guess the sad thing is that attitude is not that uncommon among certain religious denominations, particularly Christian denominations. I mean, the view is that abuse, even severe abuse to the point where you feel like your life is in danger, that is not grounds for divorce in some of these denominations. The only grounds for divorce is infidelity.
Yeah, where I went to church, that was exactly it. I mean, they basically wouldn't grant a divorce unless there was an affair. And if there was abuse, they said, well, that's unfortunate. And if you have to leave to like save your life or something, you can leave, but you can't divorce because that's not grounds for divorce. So you have to stay married to this person. Yeah. That was the attitude where I went at the Church of Christ.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. So I've seen this, you know, played out where these very religious women are in this relationship and they did something bad in the past. They cheated, or they, or I don't know, they didn't go to church enough or something. And the man holds that over their head and says, you're sinful, you're evil, you deserve what's being done. And I mean, that's what the Bible says, that you deserve eternal torment. And technically the abuse that these men are doing is only a small fraction of that. So that's part of how the religion perpetuates this abuse. The other way that this happens is, and I haven't experienced this in helping people, but I think it happens a lot too, is if one person is religious and the other person isn't. Part of the strategy of an abusive person is to get everyone else on the abuser's side. So to try and alienate the person, the victim, and try and get everyone else, you know, against the victim and side it up with the abuser. So one way they do that is by projecting how holy they are and maybe how worried they are if their person is an atheist, if the victim is an atheist. So there's an example here, using the church as a way to win families. I'm on the wrong page. So basically what happens is this guy is going to his woman's family and saying, you know, I'm really worried that she's not going to church. You know what kind of person does that? I'm just trying to keep her godly and make sure that she's on the right track. So what he did is he would make regular appearances at certain Sunday services and find a way to coincidentally sit next to the woman's relatives. He engaged them in a conversation about his concerns about her loss of faith and how bad he felt that Tina wasn't giving their children the benefits of consistent church attendance. He also slipped in a few assertions that he knew would bring to mind the kind of person who skips services, saying, our children tell me she's been drinking heavily and bringing a lot of different men around the house. And then that turned, you know, the family against her. And that's what religion does, is helps turn families against each other. And the abuse was just used to perpetuate that. And then one final thing that the way that church kind of helps abuse along is it's kind of treated as this way to keep the abuse at bay. And so women will say, or I've heard women say, oh, he's so good when he goes to church, and when he doesn't, that's when he gets abusive. And really what happens then is that the church is just being used as a tool to say, you better watch out, because when I don't go to church, that's when you're going to get it. And it's kind of the same thing with like alcohol or drugs. The alcohol isn't what's causing the abuse. And it can often be used as a tool to scare the woman. So, if a guy starts like drinking a whole bunch and staring at the woman, he's kind of saying, you're gonna get it later. I'm drinking, and you know what happens when I drink. So the same thing with not going to church. It's like, what's gonna happen, because I'm not going to church, because I'm mad at you. And so it's kind of ridiculous. And really, the alcohol, the drugs, the church going, they don't have anything to do with the abuse. Because usually, even when the person is sober, even when the person is not going to church, they're still exhibiting that controlling behavior and trying to force someone to do something and act a specific way. And then the not going to church or the drugs or alcohol is just part of the punishment. And that's what ends up getting the blame instead of the person doing the abusing. So that's what I've been witnessing and kind of learning about and tying all together. It's my presentation.
Okay. I have a question.
Okay.
If these men didn't have religion, what other excuses would they have?
Alcohol.
Yeah, the alcohol was just the thing Tracie mentioned, but she doesn't have a mic, so I want to give her proper credit. There's the patriarchy. There's just that I just am the head of the household, or they say, I'm just trying to help you be a better person. There's all kinds of excuses, or I was raised in a bad household, and so I just can't help it, or all these women were cruel to me in the past.
Like, would it also be the case that they might look for things to nitpick about her, like just her lack of like domestic, what do you call it, like vigilance? You're not clean. The place is always a sty, and nothing's ever done well with the house. Like, would they use something like that?
Yeah, well, the thing is, usually when abusive men get into a relationship with a woman, they put the woman on a pedestal and they think that she's perfect. And when she doesn't live up to that perfect pedestal standard, he gets angry. Wow. Because she's not what he thought she was. And he wants her to be that perfect ideal, and he gets frustrated when she can't live up. So anything can be used as an excuse.
I still wonder if these ideas of women being submissive and men being in charge weren't so prevalent because of religion, if there would be that much abuse. As much abuse as there is. There would still be some always, but...
Oh, for sure. It definitely helps.
Well, I think one of the things that religion does for abusers is it gives the abuser a socially acceptable cover for being that way. And I think I've told the story before, maybe I haven't, about this friend of my parents when I was a teenager, and she was married to this guy who he was a jerk, and he was an alcoholic, and he wasn't a very good husband or anything. And I think this friend of my parents, she just got fed up and said, either you clean up your act or I'm leaving and I'm taking the kids. And so he found Jesus. And I've always said that the only thing that changed about this guy was that he found a more socially acceptable way to oppress his wife and children. Because his underlying behavior didn't change. He was still using, before he used his alcoholism to control people in his life, and after he found Jesus, he used religion as a way to control people in his life. So I think, in a lot of respects, religion just serves as a socially acceptable excuse for bullying behavior.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, and a lot of the relationship advice that religion tends to give is among those sexist lines of submit. The clergy were agreeing with those things, and that's the kind of thing that they teach in healthy relationship classes. Well, the relationships aren't healthy, but they're biblically based, and so it ends up getting pretty ridiculous. So, yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of abusers and men who commit crimes against women, I think Jen has a story about rapists.
Well, actually, it's a paper that was published in the British Journal of Psychology, and the title of the paper is "Lights On at the End of the Party: Are Lads Mags Mainstreaming Dangerous Sexism?" And just for context, the lads mags that we're talking about, it's not strictly pornography because they don't have pictures of naked people. So the people are not nude. They might be scantily clad or whatever, but they're not nude. So it's not technically classified as pornography. So a lot of it has a lot of stories in there and includes some, I guess, what you would call relationship advice. And I know Tracie had a chance to read this as well. So Tracie, if I get something wrong, feel free to chime in here. Basically, what they were looking at were some of the statements in these lads mags about women, and they were comparing them to statements made by convicted rapists. And to be fair, they did go through the lads mags and they picked out some of the more extreme quotes that they could find in there. And they, had a list of quotes from convicted rapists and a list of these quotes from these lads mags. And I guess the goal of this was to examine, I guess, people's responses to these and, rating them as to how extreme they were. And it turns out the ones that they picked out of the lads mags were rated as more extreme. Not surprising. Again, they picked out the most extreme ones they could find. But the interesting thing about the study was later on when they gave people the source of a specific quote, whether it was the truth or a lie, regardless of the source of the quote, the men in the study more closely identified with what they thought was a quote from a lads mag, even if it was actually a quote from a rapist. And so basically, the idea was that if it came out of this magazine, it was okay.
Well, I want to just add one thing, just to say that there was like two parts to this study. And one part was just judging the statements on sheer level of sexism. And I think it's important to note that when they did the judging, they had like the statements where they weren't identified for a source, and then they had them where they mixed it up and lied about the sources, like, didn't tell the truth about whether they came from a magazine or a rapist. And then in the other one, they in the other version, they had them set up to where they told the truth and said, these are from the magazine, these are from the rapist. And they asked people to judge like the sexist content of the statements. And weirdly, everybody judged those statements in a way that conformed to the sexist rating scales. There's apparently, and I didn't know this till I was reading this article, but there's apparently like a few different kinds of rating scales for sexist language, like in psychology. And these people that were judging these statements judged them correctly to be more extreme statements that came from the magazine, regardless of what they were told about the statements and where they came from. So people seemed to be able to recognize something was more or less sexist. But then when they were asked what they most identified with, when you jumbled up whether it was from a magazine or from a rapist, if you lied, if you told the truth, it didn't matter. They always went for, if it came from the magazine, then I identify more with it. And they would always go with whatever you told them came from the magazine, whether it did or not. So it was very weird because in one part of the study, everybody was clearly sort of judging these things, no matter how you applied them, as correctly more extremely sexist. But then when you ask them what they identified with, they just went for whatever was labeled from the magazine.
Do you have some of these quotes? Because I have not read the article. And Lynnea, have you read the article?
Actually,
we would like to play a game then. See if we can pick these out.
I'm going to say they did mention one thing about the way the quotes were worded, and I caught it, but it was hard for me because in the actual study, they tell you when they present the quotes where they're from. But as I was reading them, I did notice some differences that were the same in the quotes from the magazines that were not applicable to the rapist statements. And they mentioned it a little bit later that the quotes, and I mean, we could do the game, but I honestly think you could pick it out. Like, I think you could identify it because the statements from the magazine are more prescriptive. The statements from the rapists are just like general conversational statements. When you read the ones from the magazine, it sounds more like it's coming from a magazine, like it's something prescriptive. They're like somebody's advising you.
Well, what struck me in reading some of these quotes was how much it sounded like some of the topics that we've talked about recently on Godless Bitches. And I'll give you an example here. I think if a law is passed, there should be a dress code. When girls dress in those short skirts and things like that, they're just asking for it. Now, we were just talking about Orthodox Jewish men objecting to women riding a bus or wearing certain articles of clothing.
Right. And I think it's important. It's important to note that even though they went for more extreme statements from the men's magazine, all of these statements rated as sexist on the sexist. I mean, these are sexist statements, and all of them are. There's not a, and so I believe it was all of them. I think they went for that. Am I wrong? There might have been a few that were more, what's the word, like neutral, like closer to neutral or something. There was a little bit of a rating, but they went for sexist statements in general. And like the one that you just read, for example, about what women wear, I think that was one that the rapist said.
Yes, that was a quote from a rapist.
Yeah. And then, like, for example, you've got stuff like escorts. They know exactly how to turn a man on. I've given up on girlfriends. They don't know how to satisfy me, but escorts do. And, to me, that clearly is from the magazine. I mean, I would have guessed that from the magazine.
I would have said that.
But yeah, the dress code thing and the way that religion focuses on dress, and these statements, they are very reflective, I think, of how women are judged from a religious standpoint for how they look. It's definitely blaming the woman for the attention given to her from the man, whether she's requested it or not, or expected it or not. One guy says, what is it? Girls ask for it by wearing these mini skirts and hot pants. They're just displaying their body. Whether they realize it or not, they're saying, hey, I've got a beautiful body and it's yours if you want it. And I love that last part of it, how he interprets the idea that she's okay with her body and that she has a pretty body and that she's okay showing her body, and that suddenly it's also the case that she's telling him he can have it. Like how did he get to that? That's the part I'm like, wow, how did you get that part of the message? Because I didn't think that she was saying that anyone could have sex with her just because she has a nice body.
Yeah,
and then there's another one here. You do not want to be caught red-handed. Go and smash her on a park bench. That used to be my trick.
Yeah, and that was from the men's magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What context?
British, though, so does smash?
I assumed that I thought it was meant sex. Like I interpreted it as sex. I could be wrong, but that's how I read it. But I don't know what the context was. Let's see what else. I don't know. They're horrible, horrible statements. Mascara running down the cheeks means they've just been crying and it was probably your fault, but you can cheer up the miserable beauty with a bit of the old in and out. So it's like, yeah, you've been a dick. She's upset and, just go screw her and that fixes everything. And it's these very dismissive statements. And on the one hand, it was interesting because they talked about what's happening here. The reason for this research is that they're looking at the effects of these magazines on young people because they're trying to figure out where to place these when they sell them. So there's like a debate, I guess, going on about where they're sold and how they should be sold and whether or not they influence people and like blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like here where I used to live, if you wanted to get like a sexy magazine, it was usually behind the counter, and you would just go in and ask. You could ask the guy at the register, can you hand me the Playboy? And he would hand you the Playboy and you buy it, but you couldn't get it off the regular magazine rack. And so there was like a divide between certain types of magazines go over here and certain types of magazines go over there. And that's kind of what this is about. They're having this dialogue right now, I guess, in the UK about these magazines and where they should be placed. And so now that's the reason for this type of study, is to say, does this influence people? And what they believe they've demonstrated here, which it's not huge. It's not like it's not earth shattering. And I think they've even noted in their conclusions that there's plenty of studies that have shown similar things. All they're trying to say is that it does tend, if it's in a magazine, there are a lot of young men that seem to think that normalizes it and that it makes it okay to think that way, to believe that way, and to accept these ideas in a way that it wouldn't be if it was just a statement coming from somewhere else. Or obviously they also said, like, if it's coming out of a convicted rapist, most people would want to disassociate with it. But if it comes out of a magazine and there's a bunch of other people and there's a lot of people reading it and all your friends are reading it, then it's normalizing. And I don't think I really don't think that's too out there. You know what I mean? It's not like that's earth-shattering news.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the context of why they're doing this type of study right now.
Well, I don't think I'm really down with that then. It gets close to censorship. I mean, you don't have to give kids access to everything, but I don't know. I mean, what are you going to put behind the counter for 18 and up? Because Cosmo's got lots of sexy shit in it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's definitely a social decision. I'm just explaining this is what they're trying to establish, is whether or not this normalizes sexist ideas. That's what the question was.
Yeah, and I want to stress that this is not considered pornography, because there's not any completely nude people pictured in there. That's basically the dividing line for whether a magazine is pornographic or not. And in fact, I think that if you look at the kind of imagery these statements evoke, pictures of naked people are far less damaging, in terms of people's attitudes toward women than stuff like this. So it reminds me of, the old dodge for guys that got caught with a Playboy or something like that. It used to be, I just get it for the magazines.
For the articles.
Or excuse me, not the just get it for the articles. And that might be worse,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's, let's hope that they're not reading it for the articles. But
I mean, one of the things that people always, one of the things I think that most men with a normal view of women, that is a view that does not objectify women, is that if a man reads something like this, well, of course they're going to know that it's just, it's just a story. It's not real, And the thing is, men who rape women don't know that, and they read something like this and they think everybody is doing this. This is normal.
And that's why it's important that we're bringing this up, is not to say, oh, look at rapists and girly magazines. Yeah. It's to say you should clean up your act and you should not be promoting these things that are, aligned with rapist ideas.
Yeah, or just even if a guy never rapes a woman, this can create a distorted view of normal relationships between men and women.
I think to some degree it reflects kind of what we talked about last week. If somebody brought one of these magazines to, the ACA happy hour, I can see everybody just having a good laugh. Sitting down and reading this and being like, oh my God, what the fuck? This is crazy. Like, just laughing about it. But, like you're saying, when you go up to the top and you look at the sexist statements from the rapists, they're aligned with this kind of thinking. So yeah, if you have normal people looking at this, they're saying this is just messed up and funny and goofy and it's, it's like a joke. But when you have people that actually think that way and they think there's this culture that agrees with them, it's a little weird. So I don't think that the magazine itself is like causing anything here. I think what's happening is that we have some people in society that understand what's okay and some people that don't. And it just provides kind of, it may be intended as like humor, but when you give it to somebody that's considers this normalized already, and then they see that reinforcement, it does sort of reinforce in that person. And again, it's just like, however you want, this magazine is just information. It's just a joke. It's like whatever. But like, for example, one of the things that was in here was a piece of relationship advice that was offered in one of the magazines. It said in the May 2010 Celebrity Agony article, I don't know what that is, Danny Dyer in the UK Lads magazine Zoo advised a 23-year-old man who wrote to ask for advice about how to get over his past relationship to, quote, cut your ex's face and then no one will want her, unquote. Now, I see that as a joke. Like, I cannot take that seriously. I don't believe the guy was serious, and he did have to retract it. But it's hard for me to believe, like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, nobody I know would ever take that seriously. And yet, these guys that are quoting these rape statements, I don't know them either. You know what I mean? So I don't know who these people are, who have actually these attitudes. It's amazing.
That was actually only half the advice that he gave. The first half was that he should woo someone else and break her heart as revenge against all females, I guess. And then he said, failing that, then you should just cut her face.
Yeah, that stuff is just not even funny. I mean, it's supposed to be a joke, and even if, we're not serious, that's always the excuse. We're not really serious, it's just a joke. But I can laugh at things that really aren't funny in real life, but that's not even funny.
It's not funny, and I mean, I feel like sometimes it's okay to say racist, sexist jokes among people that you know, who know your actual values and what you actually do on the subject. When you're presenting it to people who you don't know, who might be, racist, sexist themselves, I would never do that because I wouldn't want to reinforce those kind of beliefs. And I wouldn't want people to think that I have those beliefs. So it's not funny and it's dumb. Huh. Both parts of it were just kind of weird. It seemed like there was the serious advice and then the joke about cutting the face, but even the serious advice was kind of like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes. And none of this should be taken to mean that any of us are anti-sex or have a problem with people who like to view pornography or anything like that.
Oh yeah, right. Absolutely not. I mean, this is not like an anti-porn rant. This is like you said, this isn't even pornography. This is just about these weird attitudes, right. And I don't think these attitudes are normal at all. And I don't I think that if you show these mags to a normal group of people, they would probably find them amusing. But what I have to admit and cannot deny is that there are people that aren't normal and they're taking these really the wrong way. And that's unfortunate for the rest of us that are normal. And and part of what I kept thinking, I mean, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what I kept thinking when I was reading this was the solution here is for young women not to accept this.
Yes, I agree. Don't
date this guy. Okay? Do not date the guy who has these attitudes for real. If you want to date the guy that can laugh about them and he thinks this is really stupid crap and he thinks it's funny because it's so dumb, kind of like laughing at Beavis and Butthead is funny. It doesn't mean I think they're brilliant and humorous. I think they're stupid and funny. And if he thinks this is stupid and funny, that's one thing. But if he has these attitudes, oh my gosh, you don't need that. You do not need that. And there's one thing that I really, really wanted to hit on because it was something I had mentioned to someone earlier in the day, and I was just stunned at the parallel that was in here. And it had to do with the pedestal, which is funny because Lynnea brought up the pedestal comment, and I don't think that she got it from this article. I think she was talking about from her own literature that she was reading. But I've heard this as well. When somebody puts you on a pedestal, do not be flattered. Be afraid and run in the other direction. Do not be put on a pedestal, and do not let someone put you on a pedestal. They had here on these scales for sexism, they had hostile sexism, which is the overt kind of I don't like women sexism that you know, kind of like the guy that's got it tattooed on his face. And it said women are too easily offended. It's like, okay, well, there's the overt sexist. But then you have what's called the benevolent sexist, and that's another part of the scale. And the example that they used for the what do you call it, the benevolent sexist language was a good woman should be set on a pedestal by her man. This is not good. It's not good. And if you're a female and you're looking for that guy, stop. Stop looking for that guy. You don't want it. You want somebody that treats you like a human being. Okay?
We actually got a letter once. In fact, only one letter on this asking what our ideas about chivalry were.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And my comment is, you know, there shouldn't be chivalry. There should be treating people well. There shouldn't be treating women better. And this person, and I'm not, you know, being down on them, was asking about, you know, opening doors and giving up seats on public transportation and things. And I'm like, aren't we kind of past that?
I open doors for people.
Well,
yeah.
and, you know,
anybody behind me. Yeah.
Well, you know, we've made a point of teaching our son to open doors for people. And I teach him this in the same sense that I teach him to say thank you and please. You know, because it's a polite thing to do for someone. You know, and it's not about opening a door for a woman. He opens doors for men, women, kids, you know, babies, whoever needs the door opened, he opens the door for them. You know, so, I mean, I think, I don't know, I think chivalry is overblown.
Yeah.
So just to round out the pedestal thing, that's definitely, you know, that's why these women get trapped in these kind of relationships. It's because it starts out with this, you know, super amazing, you are perfect, you're a goddess. And that's kind of intoxicating, sure. And so then...
In a scary way.
Yeah, in a scary way. But, you know, that doesn't get maintained. And then, you know, he gets mad when you're not a goddess anymore. And so there's this memory of this time when, you know, I used to be treated like a goddess. Maybe that'll come back. And that's why, you know, these sexist people are able to stay in these relationships so long, is because it starts out really nice, and it's really intoxicating and really you know, you get these deep feelings for someone. So, but if you're experiencing that, you know, check out loveisrespect.org. That's my advice.
Aren't there also cycles? Like, you know, she's treated like a goddess at the beginning, and, you know, then everything goes to hell and he, like, hits her, and then he's all apologetic and he starts treating her well again for a little bit until the next time she pisses him off. And it's a cycle, and she always thinks, well, it goes back to normal, or it goes back to good pretty often, or, you know, enough.
That's one way of looking at it. It's not perfect, because even when things are in that good period, there's still this fear of when is it going to go back. I got to walk on eggshells. I got to be perfect, and I can't. It's kind of like doing the pigeon dance, you know, the superstitious pigeon dance of that's a psychology thing. Sorry. Where you got to always walk on these eggshells to make sure it doesn't get to that thing. You know, and then so there are these kind of periods, and you feel relief during those periods. I guess I don't know what smoking feels like, but I would imagine it's that relief of, like, getting your addiction taken away. And that's why smoking a cigarette feels really good, because you just have this intense craving, and then all of a sudden it goes away, and then that just feels really good. I might be totally wrong about that, but
Actually, yeah, I've read a lot about addiction, and one of the things that reminded me of was the control. Like when a person is addictive, they're unpredictable for controlling reasons. So in other words, something happens and they're all nice about it, and then that same thing happens a week later and they have a meltdown over it and blow up and everything's crazy, and chaotic. Because when somebody's consistent, you can relax. You know who they are, you know what they do, you can pretty much gauge how they're going to react to something, what they're not going to like, what they are going to like. But when somebody's an addict and they're unpredictable, it makes you, like you're saying, it makes you have to be constantly vigilant. I don't want to do something wrong, and I don't know what's wrong. I can't figure out what's right and what's okay, because when I do this, sometimes they blow up, and when I do this, sometimes it's okay, and I don't know I never know what to do. And so the person that's the addict is in control of the situation. They've got the other person constantly worried about how to react. And that's what I remember from like the control and the manipulation from the addictive personality. But I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, but it reminded me of that.
yeah, that's it.
Well, yeah, but if it was all bad all the time from the very start, nobody would stay. It's because that there is a little good mixed in that you just get deeper and deeper.
Well, but that pigeon dance thing, are you familiar with like where they gave the pigeon the treat to teach him how to access the treat, and then afterwards they stopped giving the pigeon the treat, and he keeps doing the thing to access the treat. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like ridiculous. It was something like it took the pigeon, a dozen times to figure out how to get the treat, and then it took him like 300,000 times to figure out that the treat wasn't coming anymore. When your brain gets that reward, and when you lock that pattern in and say, I get that reward for that pattern, it is way harder to get a brain to stop, to realize the reward is not coming anymore, than it is to get the brain to realize it gets a reward. Once that brain understands this action results in a reward, it's hard to let that go.
Yeah, and it's one of the best ways of reinforcing something is to reward it sporadically, so that the animal or the person that's being conditioned can't ever predict when exactly they're getting the reward. It's something used in dog training a lot, where initially when you're training a puppy, they sit, they get the reward, they sit, they get the reward, and then after a while you reward them only randomly, and they still sit every time, and pretty soon there's no food reward or anything. They just do it.
Yeah. One other thing I'd like to touch on is, stopping abuse. Basically, the only way you can get an abuser to stop is if everyone says, what the hell are you doing? You gotta cut this shit out. The person being abused needs to say, for the abuser to stop. The person being abused needs to say, I don't need you, and be serious about it. And friends, family, relatives need to not be supportive and not be encouraging. And this kind of social support system that enables the abuse and supports the abuse needs to be taken away. And that's, part of why we're talking about these lad mags that are, enabling it. It's part of the support system, and that's what we're trying to take away.
Do you know how many abusers can actually reform? Do you know any statistics?
It's really small, less than 10%. I would say closer to 1%. And that's for people who go to programs. So, those are the people who have the best shot because they're being sent to a program. But usually they're just like, oh, the man's making me do this. She's just a bitch. She just deserved it. And they just they go through the motions. But they still whinge to their friends, and they get the support of their friends. And they still have these support systems. It's only when, their support system just totally says, this is not okay, that they feel like, well, okay, I guess I gotta change. So it's small, and it's sad, but usually abuse tends to get worse, if not stay the same. It either stays the same or it gets worse. And really staying the same is not something that anyone should have to deal with.
True, true. Well, our third topic, and this kind of came late in the day. It was sent to us. Well, I'll just say Russell brought our attention to this.
Yeah.
You sound so enthused.
It just makes me exhausted. I don't know. Go ahead. You can talk about it.
Well, I think we did decide to say what this was. There's a person on YouTube called The Amazing Atheist, who I'm not amazed with, personally.
Nope.
And I've never seen anything by him before. You know, I don't know if he does other good stuff or whatever. But there was a video called Failure of Feminism. And another I actually watched, It's Only Sexist When Men Do It. And these videos display an appalling ignorance of what feminism is.
Yes, I agree. Starting with the definition of feminism.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the definition of feminism, which hasn't changed in well over a century. It long predates even the women's suffrage movement. Okay. The definition of feminism is a movement for social, cultural, political, and economic equality of men and women. Okay. That's it.
Radical.
Yes.
I know. I know. And it doesn't say that, it's promoting women over men or considering women's issues over men. It's about social, cultural, political, and economic equality of men and women.
Okay.
Yep.
And
His definition of feminism, would you like to go with that?
Go ahead.
He wrote it on the whiteboard.
Yes, so I'm looking at the video that has it on the whiteboard now. Feminism is the idea that we can make both sexes equal by focusing solely on the issues of one of them.
So he put this on his Twitter, and then he got angry that a bunch of people told him off and corrected him, and he was like, all those people who corrected me were just wrong. So I feel like by now he's definitely had enough opportunities to educate himself and to absolve himself of his ignorance, and he has chosen not to engage and not to listen. So,
I feel like the Twitter comments that he got back were probably an attempt to point him in the right direction and let him know, hey, dude, you just really blew that definition. And I can't imagine he would have reacted this way, or maybe he would. Maybe he's got issues. I don't know. Maybe he would have reacted this way if someone could corrected him on anything. But somehow I think he probably wouldn't have, because there seemed to be a specific level of venom reserved for this topic. And I find that that's true for a lot of guys when they start talking about feminism. And most of the time, these guys don't understand anything about feminism, the history, the definitions, anything that goes along with it. One of the things that TJ said in there was he was basically denying that patriarchy exists. Because, if it actually exists, why would, because patriarchy harms men, and why would men put in a system in place that harms men, And, denial that patriarchy exists helps perpetuate the system that victimizes both men and women. And this is the thing I don't think he grasps. Authoritarian systems aren't designed to help everybody. They're designed to benefit a very small minority of people who control this social system. Patriarchy exists because it benefits that small minority. It's kind of like the 1%, And now you've got the 99% out there. Well, that's kind of what happened with the women's movement and feminists. Feminists said, hey, you've got this system in place that's benefiting a small minority of people. we're bearing the brunt of it, but, it's actually harming men too. Feminists throughout history have pointed out the harms that sexism does to men, and we continue to do so. And, it's not a zero-sum game. And that's what guys like TJ are trying to do, is turn this into a zero-sum game.
That's some really good points. Sorry, you can go ahead, Beth.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, his insistence on the definition, which a couple other atheists I know insist on it as well, is very similar to theists who insist that the definition of atheism is, believing that God does not, with 100% certainty, exist, rather than taking our word for it, that it actually means lack of belief.
Yeah.
That's a really good analogy. So I would like to talk more about the patriarchy. He brought up a bunch of examples of men who get discriminated against by the system, and he says, that means there's no patriarchy. And I was thinking about this, and in a monarch, the king has to deal with some shit. The king has to deal with not being able to eat his food without having a tester. He doesn't get to eat his food warm. Why would a king put up a system where he doesn't get to eat his food? The king has to lead his men into battle. He has to put his life on the line when he wants to fight another country. Why would he put up in place a system where he puts himself at risk? And there's always the risk of being deposed. I can't remember the name of the king, but there was one king who was killed by a red-hot poker being shoved up his ass. That's a pretty unpleasant death. It was supposedly, because he was gay, and so that was a just way to kill this guy. But, kings have faced all of this discrimination and hardship. Why would they put in place this system where they have all these negative things? You can still be in power and subjugating other people and have to deal with some annoyances because of the system that you put in place that benefits you.
It's kind of like your work with abuse, too. Like the guys that are abusing. Are they making a really happy home life for everybody? Is that really a good situation for them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's not, because they don't get real love from their spouse or their kids.
Well, and some of the points, I was going to talk a little bit about some of the things he brought up. In particular, he mentioned female genital mutilation and how everyone is outraged at this. But, where's the outrage for male circumcision?
Right here.
And yeah, exactly. Well, not only that, but, part of the reason female genital mutilation is even in our vocabulary is because feminists, and in particular Gloria Steinem, made an issue of it. And in particular, Gloria Steinem has also come out very strongly against male circumcision. And in fact, most of the people that I know who are vehemently opposed to any kinds of genital cutting, including male circumcision, most of them identify as feminists. So genital cutting in general is a feminist issue, and it always has been. And most of the defenders of male circumcision are men.
True story.
So you can't blame the feminists for that. I mean, and that is part of the patriarchy. It's part of this, authoritarian culture that says, submit your newborn son's dick to a little pruning here, because the patriarchy demands its bit of flesh. One of the other things he mentioned was the draft and the fact that men are required to register with Selective Service, but women are not. That was challenged back in the 80s. And first of all, no one in this country has been drafted for the military since the 1970s. So I don't know how old TJ is, but He may not even have been on the planet when the draft ended. And there's no willingness on the part of the military to even consider having a draft. No one in the military right now wants a draft at all. The all-volunteer army or military has served us well since the 1970s. There's no push to go back to a conscript army.
Well, I don't know if that's a valid thing to bring up, because it's kind of like the laws that are on the books at states that say an atheist can't hold office. You know, it's unenforceable, but it's still not okay that's...
But I think she was going to talk about a challenge.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
and the law was challenged in the 1980s. And actually there were some feminist organizations that signed on to the lawsuit saying you can't draft men without adding women to the draft. And the court, and I believe it all went all the way to the Supreme Court, and then the ruling was that the purpose of the draft was to conscript men for service in the combat arms. And at the time there were two laws in place that were the combat exclusion laws. And they said those two laws are on the books, excluding women from combat in the Air Force and the Navy. There were never any combat exclusion laws that applied to the Army. And therefore, you know, the male-only draft or selective service registration is constitutional. So it got shot down for that reason alone. In 1993, the combat exclusion laws were repealed. And you know, that was the thing that caused the court to rule that male-only selective service was, you know, constitutional. So now the basis for that decision is gone. So I suspect that our current policy of, you know, how we assign men and women would probably not be enough to sustain a constitutional challenge if anybody challenged male-only selective service registration. The thing is, it's got to be a guy who challenges it, because right now women don't have standing to challenge it. So a man who has to register would have to challenge that law. I can't do it for him. I'm so sorry. You know,
he could spearhead that.
Yeah, and you know, I have a son, so, you know, if it's still in place by then, we might have to challenge that.
Well, isn't it the case, too, though, Jen? I mean, you might know more about this, but aren't there countries where men and women both have to serve?
Yeah,
Israel.
there are.
Israel.
I mean,
and I mean, so it's not like it would be some amazing, cutting-edge, never-before-seen thing if, like, men and women both had to register for the draft. It's done in other countries. In fact, you have to serve, I believe, in Israel, males and females.
Exactly.
And so for here in the U.S., if they did that, it's not like, you know, we haven't done it yet, but it's certainly, we wouldn't be the first people on the forefront of doing it. It's been done, and it could be done here, and that's not a problem.
Right. But the other thing, and this is very relevant to this, no one has even been prosecuted for refusing to register with selective service since 1986. So the law isn't even being enforced.
You can't get student loans, though, unless you're registered.
You can't get student
loans. And I still have to, I stand with Lynnea on that, though, that as long as the law stands, it's unfair. So, I mean,
I no argument here. I agree. But I guess the point is that, you know, using that as you know, pointing to unequal treatment under the law, it's like, okay, dude, file a lawsuit, you know, get it off the books. But don't blame me for that, because I didn't do that to you. And oh, by the way, I spent 26 years of my life in the Army. So if you want to talk about, you know, serving in the military, to me, I mean...
Well, what's ironic is what you're saying, basically, is that it was discrimination against women that made it so that they couldn't put women in.
Yeah,
like, they can't draft them because they wouldn't allow them into combat. So it's like, oh, wait a second.
Right.
So they wouldn't allow women into combat. So they wouldn't allow, you know, equal access to, like, all the branches of military service, or I shouldn't say branches, but all the aspects of it, all the ways that you can serve. Women were restricted. They weren't allowed to serve in certain ways. And so when it comes to the draft, they're only drafting in those certain areas where women are not allowed to be. And then women get blamed because they can't be drafted. I love how it's discrimination against women becomes women's fault.
Well, and not only that, but women have actually been drafted in this country. Nurses have been drafted into the Army Nurse Corps. So it's not like we've never drafted women. It's not like women have never served in these jobs before.
Right, but I'm saying women have had to make the push to get into the military and to serve in the military.
Exactly.
And every time they've pushed to get like further and further into, to be able to do things in the military, to be able to fly a plane or to be able to, and so they push and push and push trying to get into military service, into every aspect of military service. And then they're denied parts of those service. The draft only applies to the parts that women are denied. And so this unfairness is somehow women's fault.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
You got it.
To be fair, I do know a lot of women who kind of have maybe an attitude about the draft, like, oh no, they should never draft women, da da da.
I don't think they should be drafting anybody.
Well,
just to be fair,
Well,
this
yeah,
is,
I agree.
Tracie talking. I don't like the draft at all for anybody. Nobody should be drafted. But if you're going to draft equally, I don't have a problem with it. But I don't think that the whole question of the draft is another issue. Don't support it at all.
Yeah, I don't think anybody here supports a draft. But to say that a few, women who might have some kind of entitled attitude about dodging the draft, or somebody that would say, oh, well, if I got drafted, I'd just go get pregnant or something. That's the fact that just a few women say that is really nothing against the actual argument.
Well, right. That would be like, there's guys that say if I get drafted, I'm going to Canada. It's not like that never left anybody's lips. I don't blame anybody for trying to get out of a draft. I don't like the draft. But it's certainly
before, years ago, what you would do if a guy, didn't want to serve, he could just tell him he was gay.
I was going to say that excuse has been taken away now. You can't you can't just kiss someone of the same sex.
So this is what happens when you start giving people equality. You start losing all your excuses to like dodge stuff, and it's horrible. It's like, wait a minute. So if I'm not equal, I'm gonna get drafted, and then I can't get out because I'm gay. It's like, wow, this really isn't working, is it? And that's kind of the point that you were making, Jen, is that when you have these weird splits and these weird prejudicial divides, it doesn't really work for anybody. It works against everybody.
I've also heard.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've also heard a lot of men, anti-feminist men, say, well, if you want real equality, then you need to get drafted. I'm like, okay. Okay, sure. If we're going to have it, have it. But it's like it's a punishment, like, oh, well, you don't really want equality because you'll have to take the bad stuff too.
That's kind of, sorry, I just ripped the mic out of Lynnea's hand. But no, it's kind of like those people that write to us and they talk about the Old Testament laws. And they say, oh, well, those women were so taken care of. They didn't have to work real hard with the animals in the field. And, all the men had all the wealth and they just took care of these women. And, the women were taken care of. And so really, if they did cheat and they got stoned to death, well, gosh, why were they cheating? Because their husband's taking care of everything. And they were just like kept women. And why weren't they just happy being kept? Because they didn't have all the stress of having to deal with like the fields and the, and it's like, you look at that and you're like, are you kidding me? It's almost like the religious argument when they say, like when you look at it as an atheist and people are saying, well, why wouldn't you want God to just burden all your, take all your burdens? And it's like, because I want the responsibility of my life.
Yeah.
And the unamazing atheist brings that up later too, that, well, men had more rights back then, but they also had more responsibilities. They were the breadwinner and stuff and all that bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. And who put that situation in place? I mean, if we go all the way back to hunter-gatherer societies, men and women had equal responsibility for finding food, and lifespans were longer. Things seemed to work out. And then suddenly, we had property, personal property, and oh, by the way, women, you're now personal property of some men. So anyway, that's a whole nother rant. But anyway, I don't buy this men have more responsibility, therefore they get more rights. That's buying into the patriarchy that he claims doesn't exist. And if you want to buy into the system and if you want to reap the benefits of it, then don't bitch about it when you get bit by it, because all these things that he named, those are products of this system that he denies exists.
Yeah, another one of his claims were that women apparently get 40% less prison time for the same crimes than men.
Yeah, I'd like to see a citation for that.
Yeah.
Did you look it up?
I did not have time to.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have time to look that up, but one of the things I would say is that a prison sentence is typically, when judges sentence people to prison, they typically look at not only the crime you just got convicted of, but your past record. And men are more likely to have prior convictions. And the crimes that they've committed are typically more violent.
Well, also, I just want to say, just as a general thing, right? And I've heard this quoted as well, and I'm sure I could look it up. And I've never heard it challenged. If somebody wants to tell me it's wrong, they can tell me it's wrong, and I'll correct it. I'm not married to it. But for example, a stat that I think most people have heard is that African Americans tend to get longer and more severe sentences for the same crimes as people that are not African American. Now, that's a disparity. That's a disparity, and it's not right. And all things being equal, they get harder sentences, and that's not right. That's racist. Now, if there's that kind of a disparity going on with men and women, I don't know of any group that is out rallying for disparity of sentencing between men and women. I've never heard that as like a mission statement of some feminist group, that their mission is to make sure that men get sentenced harder for the same crimes as women. If this happens, it's an unfortunate, unfair thing. Like you're saying, if it is the fact that you look at it and men have longer, histories or whatever, and that's the reason for it. If there's some reasonable basis for it, that's one thing. But if there's not, and it turned out that this was just gender disparity, I don't know anybody that's supporting that. Like, I don't know whose agenda that is. It's certainly not anybody I know that runs around, fighting for gender disparity in sentencing.
Or just enjoying it.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be fighting for racist treatment of black people. But there would be people who would say, good, get those black people off the street. Keep our streets safer. There's not this idea that good, more men are getting locked up for longer, that'll keep our streets safer. That's not a stereotype that exists.
Well, all these anti-feminists I see make these outrageous claims about, feminists say this and feminists say that, and I'm like, what feminist? Show me. I mean, I've heard a few Andrea Dworkin quotes that seemed kind of off, but otherwise, I don't know who these feminists are that are saying these things. And if you want to say that, well, first of all, you can't say feminism is bad just because there's some crazy women in it.
Yeah.
But even then, these people still cannot produce these quotes when asked.
Well, it kind of reminds me, I've got an argument that's going on the blog right now for TAE, and there's a guy that's swearing, and he's one of these Christians who's like, science supports my God, physics proves my God, neuroscience proves my God. And then when you nail him down, he'll have like a neuroscientist who in his personal views thinks there's a God, but he hasn't really published any research related to that in neuroscience. And then you'll have like some physicists that are, kind of like the biochemistry Behe, Michael Behe kind of variety.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, okay, yeah, you found the one physicist who thinks that this, implicates a God. And the rest of physics does not. And you're running around saying physics supports your God hypothesis because you found the one nut in the group. So it's confirmation bias. You go out and you just look for the one that is doing what you need them to do to prove your point, and you ignore all the other ones who aren't doing what you wish they were doing in order to make your beef a reality.
Yeah, well, and everybody likes to demonize Andrea Dworkin, and I mean, I don't want to get into a discussion of Andrea Dworkin so much tonight, but just to say that most of the people who pull up these quotes, these so-called quotes from her, are using the Fox News Cliffs Notes version of what she said, and it's not true. So just I take those with a grain of salt, because you can actually look up stuff she said, and not only that, but the stuff gets attributed to her that she never wrote and never said.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so, I believe that.
But it's easy to demonize someone that she had some mental health challenges, kind of understandable considering her history, and she had some like health issues, and she was pretty radical. She said some stuff that a lot of people were afraid to say. A lot of people shook their heads and said, I can't believe she said that. And a lot of it was at a time when, for feminists, it was important to really kind of push the envelope and push back on some really unfair things that were going on.
I just want to say, so, I just want to clarify, like, my statements weren't aimed at anybody, just FYI. I know. Beth mentioned a name specifically, and just in passing, and when I was talking about like nuts in the field of, some professional field, I'm just saying that if you're looking hard enough to find it, you're going to find it. But it's like somebody saying, I argued with an atheist one time and he said X, Y, Z, and therefore all the atheists think this.
Right. We don't have any consensus position on Andrea Dworkin. The anti-feminists always bring her up, and I've not really even delved much into her. So no position, but yeah, just one feminist saying something doesn't make it feminist.
Well, not only that, I mean, Andrea Dworkin was legitimately a feminist, and some of the stuff she said I completely agree with. Some of the stuff I disagree with. And she was part of the second wave of feminism, and second wave feminists had a reputation for being anti-sex. And one of the things, it's kind of a straw man argument, because one of the things I think it's important to note is that feminists actually started most of the big name sex shops that people are aware of that are in business even today, including my favorite sex shop, Good Vibrations. It was started in 1977 by a feminist in San Francisco.
All right.
So there. So this painting everyone in an entire movement with a broad brush is a big mistake, and of course that happens to atheists all the time.
Yeah, there's so many parallels between atheist movement and the feminist movement. It's really hard to see atheist anti-feminist use this kind of stuff, especially the definition thing. That's just crazy.
And on that definition, there's a lot of people that reject calling themselves a feminist because they have this distorted view of what that means. And again, a movement for social, cultural, political, and economic equality of men and women. That's it. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, I prefer to call myself a humanist. And when people do that, it's like, okay, now you don't understand the definition of two words that you're using. Because humanism is a system of thought that rejects religious beliefs and centers on humans and their values, capabilities, and worth. Okay, and so humanism is, it's about rejecting religious, codes and religious prescriptions for human behavior and having human value defined in terms of a relationship with a deity. You can be a humanist and be a feminist.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's a pretty big overlap, I would say, between the two groups.
Yeah, there's a lot of religious feminists, but yeah, in general.
So anyway, that's my...
Yeah, it's like atheists who don't want to call themselves atheists because they don't like, something Madeline Murray O'Hare or Richard Dawkins said or, any sort of, idea that the public has of atheism, which if atheists don't call themselves atheists, the public doesn't get the idea that atheists are normal people just like them. Mm-hmm. Same with feminism. If you believe in equality, if you believe you should get equal pay for equal work, if you believe in having reproductive rights, if you believe in all that, you're a feminist. You should say you are.
Yep. So I would just like to round out this unless there is something else we want to talk about in the video.
I can't remember anything else in the video. I just watched it.
I think I'm done with it.
Okay. So I've seen a few things by The Amazing Atheist before, and they were never kind of all that great. And I get to see Russell Glasser every day, so I have a good dose of famous atheists, famous atheist input. So I never really watched it, but I looked up this video again right before I came over, and I didn't have time to watch it. But in 2009, he made a video called "Feminism Sucks." So he's had at least 2 years, maybe 3. To figure this shit out, have this properly explained to him, and I can only say that he doesn't care to listen. The depressing thing to me, though, is the percentage of likes to dislikes. Only about 5% dislike this video. So, either he's already long scared off anyone who cares about feminism, back in 2009, and since then, all the crazy stuff that he's been saying, or there's a large group of people who agree with this video. That's kind of depressing to me, is that this is not just that this one guy has this crazy thought pattern and he's supposed to be a rational atheist. It's that there's this group that supports and agrees with this, and that's what we're fighting against.
We have people that like our show that will still say some anti-feminist stuff. They'll say, "Oh, y'all are all right, but the rest of it is okay, the rest of it is bad." And people who say the same things we do, they will even bash on. I just don't understand this.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That actually reminds me of one of the quotes from the study that we talked about earlier. One of the rapist quotes was, girls are all right in general, but most of them are bitches. Or no,
some
excuse
of them.
me.
Yes,
But some of them are bitches. The bitches are the type that need to have it stuffed to them hard and heavy. So...
That shouldn't shock you that came from the rapist. But I wanted to say about these videos. I think I've seen one or two that weren't tied to atheism. I mean, to feminism, and somebody sent me one that was connected to feminism. I didn't really know what it was, and so I clicked on it one morning and I watched it. And my reaction was, somebody asked me what did I think of it, and so I wrote down what I thought about it, and then ultimately at the end I said what's really sad is that he struck on this really ugly attitude from these daytime TV hosts that are they're women. I don't know that I'd call them feminists, but they're it's Jerry Springer. It's like calling Jerry Springer an intellectual, but so he took this daytime TV group of women and was using them as I guess the gauge of feminist thought. And when he got to the end of it, I got to the end of it, I said, what's really sad is these women were making a hideous point. They should be roundly criticized for what they were saying. And he could have made a good video saying this is a crappy attitude and a crappy thing for anyone to be promoting. But instead what he did is he tried to lay that onto feminism and then say that this is what feminists think and this is why feminism sucks. And it was wow, really? I mean, really, you could have hit on a real anti-male attitude that these women were expressing that's an appalling anti-male attitude. They deserved to be criticized, badly. But you had to go then and lump a bunch of women who are for equality into that and blame them and try to lay that on them. When I don't know any feminist, self-labeled feminist, who would even watch this program or consider these women intelligent. So it was just sad to me that it's like, here I would have been supportive of your video if you would have just said, these women are anti-male and this is a sick attitude. And I would have said, good for you. It is a sick attitude. These women are appalling. But instead, you attacked me. I agree with you that their attitude's appalling, but I don't know why you're laying that on me. I don't think that, and nobody I know thinks that, and everybody I know would look at all the women that I know that are educated and self-labeled feminists would watch that and hear that attitude and say, that is sick. That is some sick crap coming out of those women. Why in the world would you lay their anti-male attitudes onto women who believe in gender equality? I don't know why he had to go there.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, it gets down to, I think I wrote this in a response to about the Amazing Atheist video, actually, where it's basically it comes down to believing what you want to believe is true instead of what actually is true. You know, and so if you have a stereotype, again, it's that confirmation bias thing. You find something that supports this thing that you want to believe, and you latch onto it, whether it's true or not.
Yep. All right.
I just had, I guess, this one little rant, just sort of a rhetorical question I'll throw out there for any of our listeners who care to respond or not. You don't have to. It's rhetorical. Something to think about, though. How old does a woman have to be before very young men who write to the podcast stop calling us girls?
Can I just say, too, that when somebody compliments me and they throw in some sexual thing or some, I don't know, it creeps me out when when you're young enough to be like my grandson. So just, it's best not to do that because you're creeping me out. Just letting you know, it's like, I don't like thinking about that because you're way too young and I'm probably way older than you think. So just FYI.
Yeah. I will say that I think people use girls and guys for almost anybody that's not really old nowadays. I rarely hear people talking about men and applying that to anybody younger than about 30 or 40.
Yeah, I think Jen's point, though, is that me and her might qualify for really old.
I'm guilty of using girls for...
Stick to ma'am when you're talking to Jen.
Well, this is something that I remember talking about in feminist circles many years ago about how the use of the word girl is actually, it can be a derogatory term, especially when it's used to basically infantilize a woman.
Hey, girl.
Yeah, but I think we've caught up to at least some of that by guys. Guys this, and how we are, not considering men 18 and up mature. We're considering them very immature nowadays, and that they're not growing up, they're all sitting at home playing video games until they're 35, whatever. So I think there is a little bit of that too. Everybody's girls and guys, everybody's immature. I don't know.
Well, I mean, guys existed back then too. And they're not directly, comparable in terms of, and I actually, when I was an undergrad, I actually, asked some people about, why do you use the word girl instead of women? And the response I got universally was, well, when you say woman, that has a sexual connotation.
What?
And if you say girl, it doesn't
Anjali, the perfume Anjali is responsible for that.
Yeah. But, I mean, I guess one of the things that, I was going to point out is we get these emails and people refer to us as girls. It's like, okay, we've already given you permission to call us bitches. Okay. It's okay to call us bitches. And the thing about that is that girls are not adults. They cannot make decisions on their own. They are juveniles. Women and bitches are adults with agency, and, we can do stuff. So
Yeah.
Just call us the humans. To the humans at the GB podcast. And anybody that would like to, make light of this, or if you want to contact us and we've now intimidated you from using any greeting whatsoever, you can just say the humans.
Hey, I'm not going to fall on my sword over this, because I don't really care that much. I just find it amusing that, that guys who are probably half my age are writing to us and referring to me as a girl. So
It is definitely a strange kind of leftover piece of language. I agree.
Well, and one of the recent guys who did this, who was basically writing us an email telling us that if I got the gist of the email correctly, that we should just put up with lame passes from guys at atheist gatherings.
Yeah. Please don't make a pass at me at an atheist gathering. I will shoot you down. I will say I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, don't make a pass at me. I'm married and I don't do dick, so.
And by that, she doesn't mean she's lazy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has gone on a little long.
Yeah, I think we can tell by now.
We're all punchy.
Yeah.
All right. So, bitches at atheist-community.org. Don't say girls in your greeting. Okay. This is Beth, signing off.
Lynnea signing off.
Hasta la vista.
Bye, everybody.